The holidays are about spending time with your loved ones and creating magical memories that will last a lifetime. So whether it's family and friends you haven't seen in a while, or those who you see all the time, share holiday magic this season with an ice-cold Coca-Cola. Copyright 2024, The Coca-Cola Company.
I've got a lot of grandbabies, like a lot. And when it comes to finding a gift for each of them, it could add up. But this year, while I was making my way through Walmart, I realized I don't have to spend a lot to get the gifts they'll love.
An OPI mini Manny set! I'm gonna do so much nail art.
Oh, yeah! A Lego set! Might own a Walla water bottle!
Ooh, and that's just half of them.
Shop great gifts they're sure to love for $25 and under at Walmart.
So first of all, just to recap, your question was, are there fic writers who end up writing for their IP, their world that they have been writing for?
Yeah.
And I decided to start by taking this as kind of a broad question. So I went broad and I was like, okay, are there examples of people who start as fic writers and become real writers? And like to some degree, we know the answer to this, right? Like, it's 50 Shades of Grey. you know that story, right?
No.
Oh my God. What a joy to tell you this. Okay, so 50 Shades of Grey was originally a fan fiction called Master of the Universe, and it was a Twilight fan fiction.
I did not know this.
How did you not know? Oh God, this is what I know. I am chronically online. Yeah, so 50 Shades of Grey was originally a fanfic about Bella and Edward that was online. And that's where I'll have to check. I think it was on fanfic.net. But the author pulled their fanfiction story and did what's called like filing the serial code off, or like scrubbed their fic. So they changed all the names, they changed some of the physical descriptions, they changed some of the locations, and then they sold it to a book publisher as 50 Shades of Grey.
Because there's not fantasy in 50 Shades, right? There's no vampires or anything.
There are no vampires, there's no biting, but a lot of fan fiction are often set in AUs, alternate universes. So magical elements will get cut or added depending on the series. Mm-hmm. So like you might have a fanfic someone writes for Criminal Minds where it turns out the serial killer is actually a witch who can do real like witchcraft. And you're like, it's not in the world. It doesn't matter, it's fanfic. So that's like the first and simplest answer is that like, yes, sometimes fic directly becomes books. There is some interesting politics around that. And I don't mean politics as in like Democrats and Republicans and American politics. I mean like community politics about fan fiction is very much about writing for your community and being a part of kind of a group together, and it's kind of a free gifting community. So the fact that someone would take that, remove access from the free version online and resell it, there are a lot of strong feelings around that. That's one answer. How do you feel about that answer?
That's interesting. And I still think my question still stands though, of fan fiction that actually becomes sort of canon. Like if 50 Shades of Grey had stayed in the Twilight world and become like part of the Twilight franchise, like that's what I also want to know. Like, has that ever happened?
Well, I gotta say, for that particular example, I think ratings around mature content means that would never be canon.
I don't know. Have you read ACOTAR?
You know what? Yeah, I have.
Mature content is now mainstream.
Right. Romantasy is a world.
We can talk about that at a different time.
That's right. That'll be a whole new topic.
I have feelings on that.
And the second kind of problem is that when you see these kinds of examples, is like we also have to note that it can be hard to link fandom with actual authors' names, because sometimes authors, so like even like let's say stepping even outside their IP, and it's not just rewriting a story to be its own thing, but actually like starting to write your own stuff. It becomes this issue of like your pen name on AO3 or fanfic or Wattpad or whatever site you're using is different than your real name. And maybe you don't want people to know that you got your start in fan fiction, because it is often seen as like very girlish and very like, it's what women do to entertain each other. Like there's a lot of like inherent sexism in it. So you kind of run into one of those problems too, where like, do
Uh-huh.
people want to be associated, especially if it's like your earliest writing that you never had an editor, you never had someone to give you a second set of eyes, and you're like, this is very embarrassing. So
Yeah.
no one will ever find
Huh.
my fanfic. That's not true. My name is unfortunately associated with it. It's not good, and I own that. So I will say, even just like becoming a writer in general, you kind of have that somewhat stigma attached. I think it's going away. I think it used to be a lot worse.
Mm.
And so I did want to provide you with a second example that's a little
Mhm.
bit closer, which is the author of Gideon the Ninth, which is a book series. Her name is Tamsin, and she got her start writing fan fiction and got really interested in creating her own worlds and liked the kind of sandbox nature of fanfic where you kind of had some established characters and settings and then you got to play with them, and eventually became her own author, an author in her own right, and wrote Gideon the Ninth and that entire series. But in this interview with Nerdette, she talks about the awkwardness of like she can't return to her fan fiction roots because she doesn't want to read fan fiction that's about her characters that might influence how her series ends.
Interesting.
Isn't that
Interesting.
wild? You're
Yeah.
like, I don't want to steal from my fans, but that also means you don't get to enjoy the collaborative culture that you kind of came up in as a writer.
Interesting.
So that's one example that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
That you do see that kind of things. But then kind of the last example that we often see is like there's this really old school fanboy culture, and it's more in comics generally. You'll see this more like in the Star Wars world kind of area of like old school, let's say 80s comic guys who write their own fanzines and get into writing, and like their whole goal is to like make it into writing for the IP, writing for Star Wars because they're such hardcore fans and they understand the lore better than anyone. And like
Yeah.
there's some weird feelings within fandom around that as well. And so that can make it a little bit hard to find examples of this because sometimes you're just like, oh my gosh, I don't want to hear this dude rant about how much cooler he is than I am because he knows all of the planets, all the inner planets or whatever. It's like, I don't know,
Yeah.
man. Star Wars is space opera
But
to
I think
me.
you have to get into Star Wars writing.
Probably. Yes, that would be also my agreement. But funny enough, my best answer for your question came from Reddit. It turns out I'm not the only one who had this question. And so someone said, is there anybody who started as like a fan fiction writer who ended up writing for their IP, their show or their thing?
Yeah.
And there are a couple of examples of fan fiction writers who ended up writing for Star Wars, for the serialized novels, which are canon, but are not part of the universe, right? Like, or they're not directly referenced in the movies usually. And so they have
Sure.
this like broad world of broadening IP. And so you definitely see them in that cases. But my favorite example is a woman named Melissa Good. And
Okay.
so Melissa actually was writing fanfic for Xena, Warrior Princess. Did you ever see that show?
Maybe. I know of it. I know of it.
It was during the Hercules Xena,
Yes.
yes, that era.
Oh,
So
I remember.
so she was a fanfic writer, and she ended up actually writing 2 episodes for the show. And
Yay.
she's a credited writer on 2 episodes. I reached out and was not able to get in contact with her. But I did find a Q&A piece that she did with a magazine that was still published online. Because this is quote unquote old in the fandom space.
Mhm.
In that Xena hasn't been on in a long time. But talking about how she did actually end up sending in some scripts and got accepted to be a guest writer, and how it's actually a very collaborative experience. She maybe had some ideas, but you never write alone when you're writing on TV. But I think that is the truest example of writing fan fiction and then ending up
That's
writing
what
for
I
your
wanted.
IP.
That's what I wanted.
So it can be done.
Yay.
And even better, it seems that, so it's not her full-time job from what I can glean, but
Mhm.
she also has written some of novels of her own that she's published that are totally not Xena related at all, but were just like murder mysteries. So
Yay. We should send her some fan mail. Like,
we should.
we're
I
happy that
did
you
send her
exist.
an email. I was like, hi, do you want to talk about this thing that happened in the 90s? I did not get a response. That's okay. People are
Okay.
busy.
It's okay.
But I'm curious, do you feel like I answered your questions?
I do. I do. That was my question.
Yay! And there's actually a wonderful clip from Fansplaining, friend of the pod Fansplaining. Elizabeth Mingle helped me do a little bit of digging on this, and she recommended one of her early episodes where her co-host, Flourish, they had a really great explanation of some of the kind of older versions of this from one of their early episodes. So I will also play a clip of that so the listeners kind of get even more additional full context.
Always wonder, and I say this to people all the time, why is it that more fanfic writers are not writers for TV? Because all of the things that you need to learn to do to be a good fanfic writer work really well in the TV space. You need to be able to collaborate with other people on their visions for a project and see it from many different perspectives. Fanfic writers are great at that, right? You need to be able to match tone. Fanfic writers can do that. You need to be comfortable with constructive criticism and so forth. Not all fanfic writers are cool with that, but there's a lot of areas, there's a lot of communities that are, and people do take like betaing seriously in a way that I think like a lot of aspiring novelists do not, for instance, if they haven't been through a creative writing program.
That's
So
the
fun.
answer I found for you over about 2 weeks.
I love it. I'm so happy.
Yay! I'm glad I was able to answer your question, and I
Yeah.
hope listeners send in more questions because this is like a weird little fun puzzle for me. So
I love it. I'll try and think of more. I'll send you more if I have them.
yes. Do you have any final thoughts on writing fanfic IP?
I just think if I was writing, well, this is just my personality, right? Like I wouldn't be the person that's like shipping and like making random romances in my favorite IP. Like I would be like, no, what do I really think is going to happen next? And I'm going to write it and it's going to be good and I want to be discovered. Like I want this to be it.
Well, and this is also why you're a professional writer and editor.
Could be.
Because you're like, no, I'm going to do the research and I want a bunch of people to read this. And versus some of us like to be in the playground of like, wouldn't it be fun if this happened? I'm just going to see what happens.
Yeah, like I would never touch Star Wars because it'd be like, I don't have 5 years to study up on what has happened so far in canon to be able to
Right.
write something that fits perfectly.
I don't want to be the lifelong Star Wars scholar. Understood.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Anyway.
great. I'm glad that I was able to answer your question.
Remember, you can send your fandom questions to me through Twitter at SadieWit, my Instagram at Sadie_wit, or through the form on my website, sadiewit.com. Yes, I know my last name is Witkowski, but nobody can spell that, so I'm trying to make it easier on all of you. So that's Wit spelled W-I-T. Now for the show's credits. Today's question was brought to us by editor Dr. Anna Funk. Editorial support was provided by, obviously, Dr. Anna Funk. Music was composed and performed by Chris Scott. Cover art was designed by Liz Hand. In Defense of Fandom is a part of the Geekscape Podcast Network. If you like the show, giving us a review on Apple Podcasts is a great way to help support this work and help even more listeners discover us. Your support is deeply appreciated. Now, see you guys at the next question.
You're listening to the Geekscape Network.